إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين. There's no truth but in Allah. لا حق إلا الله. لا وارث إلا الله. There is no inheritor but Allah. لا غالب إلا الله. There is none but Allah who is victorious. On this third episode, as it were, of the journey through the primordial deen, through the deen al-fitra, from tawheed to prophecy to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to the individual, to the self. This is the journey, I think, that this reverse journey. The ascent, the arc of ascent goes up, and there's also an arc of descent. The ascent to the maqam of tawheed, to the station of tawheed, to the station of unity, to the proximity of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the descent back. Now, this is the epitome of the uniqueness of the Prophet ﷺ. It is the ascent to the celestial heavens, the visage of this blinding visage of oneness, and then the descent back. Very, very few people who have had this honor would ever want to come back. I mean, I know if I had this incredible privilege of even starting this journey, why would I want to come back to this dunya of thickness and grossness and density? But the Prophet came back, and he came back having seen that effulgence and having witnessed it with his inner heart, with his fuad, and returned. Inshallah, I'll talk about the Mi'raj later and why it has made the Prophet Muhammad as an experience that is unique to him, and therefore marks his prophecy from others. Of course, other prophets had their own intimacy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Musa alayhi salam was Kalimullah, Allah spoke to him. Isa alayhi salam was Ruh Allah. Prophet Abraham was Khalilullah, the friend of Allah, the intimate of Allah. So each of the prophets, in their own way, had a relationship that was unique to them, apart from their role as the transmitters, these agents between the absolute and the relative. They had this other faculty, this other quality, I would say, the quality of nearness and proximity that was specified. So each of the prophets had his own unique access, as it were, unique doorway into the divine presence. And each of these was unique to that prophet. It was not transmittable, as it were. So it is the flavor of prophecy comes with that exposure to one of the infinite faces of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is wajhullah, as the Quran says. This is one of the aspects. And all prophets have experienced or engaged with an aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that marks forever the quality and the subtlety of their prophecy. The prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a combination of all of the aspects seen in one brilliant effulgence. So it wasn't one face, it was the multiplicity of aspects. And inshallah I'll be able to elaborate more on that as the talk continues. But of course in the Quran there are a large number of ayahs that deal specifically with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But I must say they are less so in number than deal with Musa ﷺ or Ibrahim. In fact, if you read specifically the number of times the Prophet was mentioned, it is really not that many ayahs where the word Muhammad appears. There's of course a whole surah on the Prophet, but the actual number of ayahs where there's a specificity to the word Muhammad are very, very few. There are of course many ayahs where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks directly to the Prophet when he says qul, or say, and that it's a direct command, so the command relates to the Prophet, and therefore the ayah carries the word of the Prophet as commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through revelation. So every time qul huwa Allahu ahad, say, the command say is addressed to the Prophet, and of course through the Prophet to all of mankind. So there's a specificity to it as well as a universality to it. And the universality of qul, or say, is what we all relate to. So when we read the ayah, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say Allah is one, that universality applies to us. But in the specific context of the Quran and the orders of Tanzil, it's a command to the Prophet ﷺ. But even if you include these ayahs, the number of times that the Prophet is mentioned as such is in fact dwarfed by the number of times that the other prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are mentioned. The first time is in Surah Al-Baqarah 119, and here I'm just referring to the ayahs that speak to the Prophet in his context as holder and transmitter of the prophetic message. It is not the Prophet in the context of, especially the Medinian period, where there was a lot of issues to do with legislation, to do with human relationships. And some of the Meccan ayahs also deal with that, but the majority of Meccan ayahs do not deal, as it were, with horizontal matters dealing with societies and with relations between members of a human community or between genders and so on. The Meccan ayahs, of course, are the ayahs of effulgence, are the brilliant ayahs, where there's only this vertical connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 119. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna arsalnaka bil-haq bashiran wa nadhiran wa la tus'al an ashab al-jahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We have sent you by the truth. So that the truth, the message that is carried by the Prophet ﷺ is the truth and all the aspects of the truth, so both universally and specifically. The Prophet is also commanded only to call to Allah. He's not to bear any message relating to himself. And throughout there is absolutely an iron wall between the Prophet's role as the transmitter of a revelatory message and his role as a prophet. So his role as a prophet is not confused with that from which the source of the message emanates. There is no confusion between divinity and humanity here, as had happened, of course, in the way that Christianity evolved, creating a tripod, the Trinity, whereby the identities of the three are merged into one, and one is expressed in the three. In the Quran, it is absolutely clear that when the Prophet calls to yielding to the divine reality, he is speaking as an agent. He's not speaking as a person through whom the divine reality is immanent or manifests itself. There are many other aspects, of course, of the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ in the context of the Quran. One of them is that he has to bear really the burden of dealing with all kinds of people, and all kinds of, some are ruffians, some are scoundrels, some are great beings. But this variety of human experience, the variety of human beings that he encounters, requires from him a softness, a leniency, an ability to absorb setbacks, an ability to deal with all kinds and all varieties of people. And this is not only the Quranic injunction. The Quranic injunction fell on a character that is able and capable of expressing the kind of openness to the varieties of human beings that exist, that gives it also the kind of color to the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ. Musa ﷺ was known for his anger. I mean, he was a very angry man, Musa, and angry for good reason. When he hurled the lawh, the tablets, to the ground. So these kinds of specific qualities that are expressed in the prophets. Ibrahim a.s. was very forthright and very, very insistent upon his tawheed. Prophet ﷺ was extremely flexible and accommodating because of the nature of his prophecy that had to respond to a variety of circumstances and a variety of people in a variety of conditions and moments in time. And as the universality of his prophecy began to unfold on the map, as it were, of history, then you can see that quality of character can cross generations, can cross boundaries, can cross cultures, and can cross nations. But he also shares in nearly all the qualities of the prophets that I referred to earlier. I mean, mainly the ones to do with witnessing, the shahid, calling, the mubashir, and the warner, the nadir. And there are a number of instances in the Quran where this set of words or references to the Prophet always come sequentially. Shahid, Mubashir, Nadir. Sometimes it's Mubashir and Nadir, sometimes it's Shahid and Nadir. But these are the three qualities that consistently stay with the Prophet as part of the essential features of his prophecy. The prophecy also is inseparable from the Quran. In fact, expressions, for example, one of the hadith on the Prophet ﷺ is that when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, can you describe the Prophet? And she said that he was a man who was the walking Quran. So the idea of the Quran as a discriminator, as the book that differentiates, as the book that judges, as the book that balances, these qualities in it were part of the makeup of the Prophet himself. So he absorbed, as it were, he internalized the Quran and expressed it in his demeanor, expressed it in his actions, expressed it in his talks, expressed it in all the circumstances in which he found himself. So this duality between Quran and prophecy is in fact carried to the point of doctrine in Islam. The understanding of the Quran is primarily rooted in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So his example, his actions are referentially to the Quran, and there are ayahs that in fact confirm the prophetic function as being the carrier of the heart of the Quranic message in the action and thought and deed. And here, for example, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أنزلنا عليك الكتاب إلا لتبين لهم الذين اختلفوا فيه وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. We have not sent you the book except to show to these people what they have been disputing about, and as a guidance and mercy to all those who believe, who have faith, or who have security or certainty of this knowledge. Of course, Iman in Arabic, which means loosely translated as faith, is not really faith. It is, Iman comes from the root word amana, which means to be secure in something. To be secure means that you are certain, that you know, that you are protected within the limits and bounds. So the word faith, which has in it a kind of leap of imagination, as it were, or a leap of faith, doesn't have the same resonance and connotation, and that's why believers and belief and so on do not really mean the same thing in the context of those who are certain, as it were, who have Iman in the Deen of Islam. So it is like a fortress in which you feel secure. It's an encampment in which you are made whole within that term of reference. So the example, the Quran, which is a revelatory message, is not only transmitted through the Prophet, it is also expressed through his actions, through his deeds, and through his words. So there's a duality of function here. The Torah of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam are not necessarily connected with his example and his action. The religion, as it were, of Judaism is much more textually based than based on the actions and conduct of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And actually, I would say the reverse is true in Christianity, in the sense that the doctrines are not held in the book itself. The doctrines are evolved in relationship to the action of the principal actors in the unfolding of Christianity. So we have people like, apart from what is said to be the actions of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam, you have the actions of the apostles, you have the actions of Paul, and so on. So it is much more based on the conduct of individuals and peoples, rather than based on the sacredness, as it were, of the text. In the primordial religion, as it were, the two have to be together, and this is one of the reasons I believe that the element of distancing of these religions from what their transmitters said, what their transmitters intended, is very clear to all. There has to be a unity between the message and the deliverer of the message, so that when you look at the deliverer of the message and interact with the deliverer of the message, you're in fact imbibing the message itself. And I dare say that in the at least in the Islam of the prophetic period, the two were combined. The message and the deliverer of the message, in their totality, were a true reflection of the divine commands, the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, there is no, the choice is always given to human beings to accept or reject this the totality of the message, to accept or reject the Quran as it is expressed and the conduct and actions of the messengers, the holders, the transmitters of the message. And there are many passages in the Quran that not admonish, but point to the limits of the ability of the Prophet to affect people. He is not their guardian, Allah says. وَلَسْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ بِوَكِيلٍ Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ وَكِيلًا. We have not sent you to be their guardian. These people must make up their own minds. There are other ayahs which say in other words that وَلَسْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُسَيْطِرٍ. You cannot enforce your will on them. وَمَا هَدَيْتَ مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You cannot guide a person simply because he is near to you, he or she is near to you, because you love them or because they are dear to you. The act, the final act, is that of the individual. It is not by compunction. It is not by force. It is not by. That's why it is extremely hard, I think, to hear that Islam was spread by force. In reality, the prophetic message during the prophetic period was specifically aimed not to be spread by any compunction. It is a message meant for free people to make a free choice. It is not a message meant in order to oblige people to follow a certain code of conduct. So what I call prophetic Islam, inshallah, I'll discuss that tomorrow, in more detail tomorrow. This is the pristine or the primordial faith, which presents human beings with both the sacredness of the text and its undoubted origin. And here I'd like to maybe speak about some personal experiences as to how it crystallized the whole Tawheedi experience in one or two ayahs of the Quran. So you have the undoubted sacredness of the text, and that is that it influences people in different ways and different grades. And you have the undoubted veracity of the messenger. So both of these unite and create a circumstance which makes it very, very easy for people who are properly attuned to immediately yield. Umar radiallahu anhu, as soon as he heard, he was one of the greatest enemies of the Prophet. He heard the Quran and he switched all of a sudden. It's just a word, a cadence, an inclination, a small act immediately crystallizes and as well precipitates this sudden desire to yield to reality. And the message of the Prophet, as well as his own conduct, demeanor, actions, combined together created basically an irresistible force for those who are properly tuned. So there's the tuning of the self is necessary, absolutely necessary, to be able to accept prophecy. And that's why I think I gave you earlier on one reason about the circle of prophecy and why, in this sense, Prophet Muhammad is the end of the circle of prophecy. The other reason is, will give you several more. The other reason is this, is that if there is no receptacle that is willing to acknowledge prophecy, prophecy cannot happen. It cannot happen in a vacuum. And I firmly believe that human beings have drastically diminished their capacity to engage with the sacred. Of course, prophecy, sacred texts, all of this is to do with recognition of a realm that is not seen and not touched. The whole Quranic experience is aimed at those who believe in the unseen. If you don't believe in the unseen, it doesn't mean anything, really. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة وما رزقناهم ينفقون. First opening verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, Alif Lam Mim, that book, of which there is no doubt, La Rayba Fi. It's a guidance for those who are in awe of Allah. Well, taqwa can also mean piety, but I prefer the word awe. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, who believe in the unseen. Now, if the Prophet ﷺ came to a nation that does not believe in the unseen, as part of its makeup, what kind of prophecy will that be? Nobody would listen to it. And the capacity of human beings to engage with this dimension of the sacred has shrunk to negligible levels now. So even if a prophet emerges, he will have no audience, or very, very few audiences. And there's a proof, in fact, in history. Since Islam, there has been no great religion. There's no great religious force that's come about. There have been schisms. You can talk about Sikhism in the 16th century. But that's more syncretic, indeed. The three great modern religions, not great, but the three religions that have emerged are mainly 19th century religions, as offshoots of the great Abrahamic faith. The Mormons in the United States are, in their own way, are offshoots of Christianity. I mean, their formal name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They have, 18 million, 20 million members now. And the two, I don't want to call them, but the two other groups that call themselves religion that emerged out of Islam. One of them emerged out of Shia Islam, which is Baha'ism. And the other emerged out of Sunni Islam, which is the Ahmadiyya and Qadriyya. Both of them can find their origins in peculiar conditions of the 19th century. In one case in India, and the other case in Iran. And their adherents are not more than a few millions. So the rise of genuine prophets is impossible in the context of lack of receptivity. One hand does not clap. So there is this, as it were, historical proof that it has to be the end of prophecy, because for 1400 years there has been no great religious upswell that has turned into a world or a universal religion apart from Islam. So Islam in that context, that's more of a historical answer. But I think a deeper root to that is not the fact that there's been no great religions, as we have proven, but the fact that human beings' receptivity to prophecy has shrunk drastically. And it is part of Allah's plan. I mean, what we know of Allah's plans is infinitely small, but what I can see or infer is that as human beings lose their ability to understand the sacred, and therefore take as a matter of course miracles. Miracles, the word in Arabic for miracle is mu'jiza. It's not really miracle in the sense of extraordinary. Mu'jiza is rooted in the word ajaza, which means to despair, that you give up, you're exhausted. So a miracle is something that exhausts your reason. It's something which breaks, as it were, the boundaries of cause and effect. And you see things, an effect, without a cause. And you cannot relate it to any set of sort of axiomatic principles. So a mu'jiza is unthinkable, I think. Anything that breaks axiomatic norms is now subject to all kinds of analysis and lab experiments and God knows what else. And every reason and justification is given for it, except the only one that holds, which is the transcendental. I mean, we take so many things for granted, and subject them to the laws of cause and effect. But in reality, they are so extraordinary. Even my presence here is extraordinary. Why did I end up here? By what set of sequence of events? Where did they start? They could have started in Sharjah in 1975 when I first met Sheikh Wallah. So every pattern, if you try to trace it, is miraculous in its own way. But human reason wants to bring it to the level of the intelligible, to the understood, to the comprehensible. And the laws of cause and effect govern our lives to such an extent that we're unable to see beyond that. So the capacity to understand non-rational, non-sentient, not to think non-linearly, but to think in ways that goes beyond causality is lost. Now, prophecy and sacredness are essentially from the realm of the unseen, not from the realm of the seen. They're like messengers from a different zone. From the start, you think this zone is non-existent, or that zone can be somehow explained. So I find it extremely futile, and I get quite angry actually when I see some sort of modernist Muslims trying to explain away these things by using reason or by using rational calculations. That has no basis. There is a transcendental world out there which is described with great deal of force in text. And the messenger himself carries in him the capacity of transcendence. So how can you deny the existence of a realm in which these things happen? But the reality of the matter is that this capacity has shrunk. And therefore, prophecy cannot arise anymore unless a new human being comes to the fore, a new kind of consciousness comes to the fore. The old consciousness can only rejuvenate itself from a point where it is nearing its death. And by that I mean the ability to have security in the knowledge of the unseen. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. This is the second sort of apparent or manifest justification for the end of the prophetic cycle. The third one, which I will come to now, is the Mi'raj of the Prophet. And the Mi'raj has in it all the elements, not only of the highest drama, but also of the highest levels of transcendence. There is no way that you can imagine, or in the imaginal sense, this sequence of events in non-time, where the end of the cycle, the story is not yet finished. The Mi'raj did not end when the Prophet ﷺ ascended to the seventh realms, because he returned. So the cycle continues. Its effect diminishes, but the cycle is like a spiral. The knowledge of that diminishes. People's ability to engage with it beyond just stories that you tell children is diminished. And again, I think to get the full potency of the meaning of the Isra and Mi'raj, you have to have a very powerful imaginal faculty, a faculty that takes it for granted that distances are compressed in light seconds, as it were, and realms and boundaries are torn without any effortlessly. Without that imaginal faculty, it's a story for children. With that imaginal faculty, it's the understanding of the nature of prophecy. Of course, the Quran talks about the Isra and the Mi'raj. They're two different things. Isra is when the Prophet ﷺ moved horizontally, physically, from where he was, Mecca, to the Masjid al-Aqsa, to Jerusalem. And that was a journey that took place physically in time. And the Isra, I mean, there are many hadith that deal with the Isra, and there are many ways in which it has been explained. fulsome description is given by Jalaluddin Sayuti on the Isra of the Prophet. There was, of course, preparation done for the Prophet. His heart was cleansed, literally, physically cleansed by Jibreel alayhi salam. And then he rode this mount, Buraq. The word Buraq comes from the word Barq, which is it's lightning, but it means that this beast rode horizontally at lightning speed. And why was the Isra of the Prophet necessary at the physical level? And there's proof why it was at the physical level. First of all, many people witnessed that his bed was slept in, even though he was not there. He had seen a caravan en route to Jerusalem, which was not known of before. He could describe in detail the Masjid al-Aqsa, the mosque of the furthest mosque. And these were done physically in order to keep the doubters, the Arab doubters of Quraysh, who are like today's, mainly like today's people. They only believed in things that they can touch and weigh and measure and value numerically or value monetarily. And they were assured from that point of view that this must have happened. So the Isra, which is the first part of the ascension, is to show to the doubters that the laws that govern speed, laws that govern distance, laws that govern the ability of created entities to move at this lightning speed is absolutely insignificant in the divine pattern. So it had to be, the Isra, this horizontal journey, had to be at the level of feeling, sentiency, in order to convey to those who wanted to see, wanted to be sure that breaking of miracles, that is, where reason cannot be used to explain away these things. Then, in Masjid al-Aqsa, in this mosque, the furthest mosque, the Prophet ﷺ meets other prophets, Musa alayhi salam, Isa, and he leads them in prayer. So the leadership of the prayer of the Prophet, of all the prophets, implies a certain degree of privilege and preference. And then the Prophet begins his ascent, and he passes through various stages, various heavens, and at each point the Prophet meets one of the prophets. For example, he meets Prophet Adam in the first ring, then the second ring he meets Prophet Yusuf, and then Idris, and so on, and then Musa, and then at the seventh heaven he meets Ibrahim, and there is no dialogue between them except salams. Assalamu alaikum, and the answer is alaikum assalam. It is a mutual recognition with nothing more to be said. This also established a certain degree of, I won't say preference, and preference is the wrong word, but a certain hierarchical differentiation between the prophets himself and the other prophets, in the sense that there is an element of universality about his message, which is far more general than those of the other prophets that were far more focused on groups and communities and specific nations. So the ascent through seventh heavens. At each heaven, where there's a doorkeeper that was a prophet in his own right, establishes, I believe, a certain finality to the prophetic message. And then the final stages is when he approaches the lote tree, Sidrat al-Muntaha. And there, even Jibreel, who is he's not called an angel, he's a great being, stops and says, I cannot go further than that. And then the Prophet ﷺ moves beyond Sidrat al-Muntaha until he reaches nearly the divine presence. As the Quran says, Surah Al-Najm, قَابَ قَوْسَيْنَ وَأَدْنَى. He's within 2 bows length from being anything nearer, of course, it would end. And the description of the Prophet at Sidrat al-Muntaha, I think establishes for me the finality of prophecy. From their role not only as transmitters and as relayers, but from their role as holders and unfolders of the divine reality as it expounded in time. And I cannot do better than read to you Surah Al-Najm, which is really magnificent in its description of. I'll read the translation in English from. I think it's a very good translation, by the way, by Tarif al-Khalidi. By the star when it plunged, your companion has not veered from the truth, nor is he misguided, nor is he giving voice to his fancies. It is but an inspiration, inspired, taught by him one immense in power, daunting. He took his stand, being on the upper horizon, then drew near and hung suspended, and was 2 bows length or nearer. And he revealed to his servant what he revealed. The mind did not question what it saw. Do you dispute with him what he saw? And he saw him a second time, by the low tree of the extremity, near which is the garden of refuge. When there covered the low tree that which covered it, the eye neither veered nor overreached. He saw some of his Lord's greatest wonders. Now, one of the greatest wonders that came with that ascension is in fact the command for prayer. It is prayer, unlike the other obligations, is only joy. The Prophet ﷺ used to instruct Bilal before the Salat, Arihna, ease us, announce the prayer so that we are all eased. Everything else has a form of burden to it, if you want to use material terms. I mean, some you are fasting, you are not eating, so there is an element of it that of stomach ache or being hungry or whatnot. There's no doubt about that. Hajj is not an easy thing to do, even in these supersonic days. It's something that involves some personal discomfort, and also these days a lot of health risk too. I mean, I don't know anybody went on Hajj and came back without some terrible influenza or flu or something, which lasts months. I mean, many of my relatives are still coughing from the Hajj. So, zakat is you part with what is most dear to human beings these days, which is money. I mean, it can't be denied. It is not something that you do, and that's why you have to do it. But salat is in fact a joy, and if it's a burden, you shouldn't do it. That's my belief. Then it becomes just sore knees. The command, the greatest wonder, is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow human beings to dialogue with Him. I can't imagine anything greater than that. I mean, why should we be given this great privilege of dialoguing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I mean, isn't that a huge gift? Must be. The Prophet, of course, came back. As I said earlier, I wouldn't have come back. I don't think anybody of us. So, I mean, you're seeing the reality in all its glory. Who wants to come to this world of denseness? He came back and continued, and all kinds of things happened afterwards. So, the element of grandeur, as it were, in the prophetic message, is not only one where he's privileged to ascend in this way. But he's also privileged to inform humanity of their obligations, their duties, and also what they can expect. So, in this context, I think the hierarchical supremacy, as it were, of the Prophet is established, although he shares with all the prophets the nature, as it were, of prophecy. But all the other prophets carried its nature as well as carried a certain specific aspect to it. Prophet ﷺ carries both the nature as well as the general aspect to it. And I think the university of Islam is not so much the fact that it is spread around the world, is that it has emerged in the most, I think it was one of the most God-forsaken parts of the world. Arabia is 500,000 people in the time of the Prophet. There's no one there. Just desert and hungry people and oppression in the city, in the towns. There's no cities, and the biggest Mecca is probably 20,000 people. So out of this wilderness, literal wilderness as well as wilderness of heavy hearts, emerges this being, which he was of the place and is not of the place. He's of the time but not of the time. He's of these people but not of these people. He speaks Arabic but is not, in his prophetic sense, he's beyond Arab and non-Arab. So the universality of prophethood by its very nature has to be expressed in a prophet. The specific nature of prophethood is expressed in specific prophets. And one of the great reasons, I think, that there's still this vitality, still, to Islam, is that it still has the capability of transcending the specific forms in which it has emerged. Once it loses that, I think it becomes just a cultural body and probably a big nuisance to many people. So I have tried to I have been trying for a long time to understand the universality of the prophetic message, and because the Quran has, in the talk earlier, made it clear that the Prophet ﷺ comes within a certain line, in a certain progression. So why is there a finality to his prophethood? And you can say the finality is part of the doctrine, but as I said earlier, I was not raised in a doctrine. I had to create my doctrine as I went along. So I had to find the reasons that are both convincing to my mind and above all to my heart, that these are true. And the truth comes by a bit of exploration here and a bit of detective work there, and you'll come with what I have tried to describe, is that it cannot but be the end of prophecy. It's something that is ingrained in it. Prophecy cannot continue indefinitely. There is a certain circle which closes. There's the synaptic gap, as it were, between Adam alayhi and the Prophet ﷺ. That has to be bridged. How is it going to be bridged? I don't know. People, if the end of the prophetic cycle coincides with the end of man, human being, who is receptive to prophecy, will that cycle ever begin again? I don't know. Only Allah knows. But at least within this cycle, we are very, very close to a few minutes to midnight, I would say, before this synaptic gap disappears altogether. And if it disappears, then you can say that the cycle cycle has ended finally. And Allah says in the Quran, He will bring another creation to being. خلق جديد. And it's very easy for Him. He says so. So that is one of the indisputable confirmations of the Prophet's finality. The other is, of course, the Mi'raj, which is Quranically sanctioned. So it is to do with acceptance of the veracity of the sacred book, even if parts of it are non-rational. In fact, in spite of, and because they are non-rational, I think, they shake in you the need to rejuvenate the capabilities in yourself to understand the sacred, which is not rooted in the rational. It's rooted in the supra-rational, beyond the mind, beyond the intellect. And the third reason, which I gave, is the historicity of it, the undeniability of the fact that there's been no great religion for 1400 years. You have to ask yourself why. Now, one reason, as I said, is that the religious consciousness has deteriorated. Not so much that, the knowledge of the sacred has deteriorated, or has atrophied. And there are many ways in which you can regain that, but you have to strive, and that's a subject for another talk. And whatever offshoots of the great religions that have taken place have been small and unlikely to grow into universal religions anymore. So both in terms of the necessary sequence of prophecy, in terms of its Quranic basis, and in terms of the historicity, there's undeniable that Prophet ﷺ is the seal of prophecy, which is another way of looking at it. I mean, the Quran talks about Khatim al-Nabiyyin. Khatim means two words. It can mean the end of something. When you conclude something, you say Khatam. But Khatim is also a ring. So it's a seal. Now, a seal has the same meaning, has the same implication as the end in this context. Because the seal confirms something, it closes it, and it seals it until further notice. Of course, further notice is under Allah's command. So both as a khatim, as an end of a cycle, and as a khatim, as a seal, the finality is there. When somebody gives you a sealed letter, the contents are supposed to be privileged. They're not supposed to. And that is the meaning, and this is the meaning given to the word seal of the prophets by, for example, Ibn Arabi, that it is to do with the sealing, the conclusion, the culmination, rather than an actual historical end of the prophetic age. Allahu A'lam. Thank you very much. We have, what is the next step?
Next step is